This is George. He's got the charm of George Clooney, the brains of Stephen Hawking, and the style of a young Elvis Presley, all wrapped up into one charismatic package. George is a politician, an entrepreneur, a family man, and an all-around compelling character. He's got a backstory that reads like a Hollywood screenplay, from his humble beginnings as the son of immigrants to the United States, to his meteoric rise to political fame. But above all, George is a man who knows how to have a good time. He's been known to party with the world's elite and hold his own amongst the most distinguished of dinner guests. But in case you think this all went to George's head, well, you've got another think coming. This future canonical saint rescues animals and regularly donates 6 figures to charity with a style all his own. So sit back, strap in, and get ready for the roller coaster ride of your life. He's a mover, a shaker, he might even be a Laker. Hold on tight and hide your valuables because this is absolutely criminal. A quick word before we begin. Here on Absolutely Criminal, we've stayed clear of the political sphere by design. But there's something special about George that transcends politics, and we think playing a U.S. Congressman is just his latest role. The world has never seen a politician quite like George Santos. His alleged fibs and falsehoods are legion, spanning his education, employment, and personal life. At the time of this writing, even his true identity is a matter worthy of speculation. George's lies fit a certain pattern. When a whopper from his past services, he begins by denying it. Then he usually accuses the accuser of turning abuser. Why would they make up such a malicious misstatement? He's got to get back to his hard work for the American people. As a little time passes and the evidence begins to confront him with reality, he deflects blame and/or minimizes his involvement. Now, if you'll excuse him, he's got laws to make and molds to break. As one of the first openly gay elected Republicans, he should be celebrated for his progress. Instead, any genuine accomplishments have been outshone by his chutzpah. The freshman elected to the 118th Congress of the United States could have been a hero to his constituents and the LGBTQ community. Instead, he's a mainstay on late-night television, lampooned and lambasted as a fraud.
Congratulations.
Yeah, perform a couple nights at Madison Square Garden.
I didn't know you were playing MSG.
Yes, I'll be singing all my hit songs, Piano Man.
Oh, hello, Congressman, it's Jimmy Kimmel. I said, hello, Congressman, it's Jimmy Kimmel. I can still see you.
We don't know about other countries, but in the U.S., if a politician is talking, there's a decent chance they're lying. So what makes his tall tales hit so differently? Why are folks on both sides of the political aisle so embarrassed by his phony fables? And did George irritate Senator Mitt Romney enough to bring out the conservative Mormon's potty mouth? All those questions and more will be answered as we examine the exaggerator. So get comfortable because you won't want to miss it. George Santos, if that is indeed his real name, is certainly not the first fabricator to stretch the truth to its breaking point, but it's his boldness that baffles us. In the modern age of internet and social media, a simple Google search can debunk most deceit. One of the most common questions asked of him is, "How did you think you were going to get away with it?" George addressed this question in an exclusive interview with Piers Morgan on February 20th, 2023. You'll find out later which lies, if any, he came clean about. There was a time, however, before social media, before the internet, and before the proliferation of closed-circuit cameras, a time when the term cut and paste was meant quite literally. That's all it took to forge convincing-looking documents back in the day. One of these bygone-era identity hijackers was portrayed by Leonardo DiCaprio in Catch Me If You Can. Frank Abagnale is a notorious con artist and former imposter who gained notoriety in the 1960s for successfully impersonating an airline pilot, a doctor, and a lawyer, among other professions. Abagnale was a master of forgery and check fraud, using his substantial skills to bilk banks out of millions of dollars. He famously posed as a Pan Am pilot, using fake credentials produced by very low-tech means. His criminal career came to an end when he was finally caught by the FBI in France, and he spent several years in lockup before eventually becoming a consultant for the very institutions he once defrauded. If George Santos is planning on that kind of redemption arc, he's keeping us all in suspense. He's not been formally charged with any crimes, but as you'll soon find out, that possibility seems more plausible every day. Some of George's many mistruths involve his education, including several institutions who say they have no record of his attendance. One of those is Horace Mann School, a prestigious coeducational college preparatory school located in the upscale Riverdale neighborhood of the Bronx in New York City. The exclusive education comes at quite a cost, however. Tuition for the 2022 to 2023 school year is nearly $60,000, although financial aid is offered in some cases. Despite costing more to attend than many people's annual salary in the United States, here was George on a 2020 law enforcement podcast claiming he attended.
My parents saved up enough money, and they were no longer the off-the-boat immigrants that had me in 1988, and they had a plan. They thought it was cheaper to pay for prep school than to pay for 4 or 6 years of college. So they sent me to a good prep school, which was Horace Mann Prep in the Bronx.
Horace Mann School has gone on the record saying no student named any combination of George Anthony DeVolder Santos ever attended, although the fact he pronounced it Horaceman could have been an early red flag. After his imaginary stint in prep school, he decided to pretend to attend Baruch, a public college located in the heart of New York City. Despite being a public school, Baruch is known for its rigorous academic programs and highly diverse student body.
I actually went to school on a volleyball scholarship.
You did?
I did, yeah. When I was in Baruch, we were the #1 volleyball
Did you graduate
team.
from Baruch? Did you graduate from there?
Yeah.
So did I.
I did.
So did I.
Oh, very cool.
Well, that's unlucky. That would seem to fluster most folks, but George is a professional. Seemingly emboldened by the challenge, he doubled down and retroactively declared himself a star athlete.
Great school, great institution, very liberal, but very good professors who don't show their bias, which is very interesting. But that's a whole nother conversation. But it's funny that we went to play against Harvard, Yale, and we slay them. We slay them. We were champions across the entire Northeast corridor. Every school that came up against us, they were shaking at the time. And it's funny, I was the smallest guy, and I'm 6'2". I sacrificed both my knees and got very nice knee replacements from HSS playing volleyball. That's how serious I took the game.
His sham of a CV listed more counterfeit credentials, including a master's in business administration from NYU. The history of George's actual academic career is unclear. For all we know, the closest he got to college is working in the College Point neighborhood in Queens. One rare verifiable claim about the compulsive confabulator is that he was employed there as a customer service rep for Dish Network. The world of politics may seem like a logical ending point for men like George Santos. His election to the House of Representatives in the 2022 midterms marked the start of one of the only career details we can verify. Over the years, he has claimed to work at many top financial firms, and he obviously fancies himself a financial genius. After obtaining his appropriately named BS degree and a mock MBA, the deceitful Mr. DeVolder entered the workforce. His resume listed his first made-up position as that of an asset manager associate at Citigroup in New York. A representative from Citigroup confirmed to the New York Times that Santos was never employed there, but they really needn't have bothered. Citi sold off its asset management division when George was still in high school. Next, he claimed to have worked at Met Global Inc. in Orlando, Florida, and supposedly delivered double-digit growth for high-key accounts. He would then return to the Big Apple to work for Goldman Sachs. Although it's the shortest-lived job, he alleged, lasting just 8 months in 2017. George boasted that he made the company $300 million. He kept up the facade for years. Goldman disavowed the human chameleon and denied his bogus boasting. When confronted with this fact, George backpedaled ever so slightly and said he never worked directly for Goldman Sachs. Rather, he worked for Linkbridge Investors, which did business with Goldman. According to the New York Times, there is evidence he worked at Linkbridge, although the duration is unclear. Santos legitimately worked for a company accused of running a Ponzi scheme, because of course he did. Harbor City Capital is an investment group founded by wealthy investor J.P. Maroney. In 2021, the U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission filed a complaint accusing Harbor City of using new investor funds to pay off old investors. So where exactly does all George's income come from? According to paperwork filed with the Federal Election Commission, or FEC, George lent $705,000 to his campaign organization. This includes a $125,000 loan just 2 weeks before Election Day. His filings also declared that he was making $750,000 a year from his own company called the DeVolder Organization. That's quite a leap from his previous attempt at being a congressman in 2020. In that failed run, he listed a more modest salary of $55,000. George's personal life has been no less bonkers than his political one. However, it's difficult to determine which of his stories are true or false. That's especially true when it comes to his most fantastical claims, which we will tell you about in a few minutes. We'll begin, however, back in 2005 in the city of Niterói, a suburb of Rio de Janeiro, Brazil. A fresh-faced teenage George Santos, or whatever name he was using at the time, adopted a brand new moniker. Meet Kitara Ravache. One of Kitara's partners in drag, seen here, is a 58-year-old Brazilian performer with a stage name Eula Richard. Eula befriended the youngster and performed in drag shows with him, and always knew two things to be constant with Santos. He never had money, and he liked to stretch the truth to its breaking point. When the first pictured surface of the young Republican letting his hair down, Santos trotted out the phrase categorically false and refused to admit it was him in the blurry photo.
A few moments later.
The day after that denial, this much clearer image materialized because the internet is forever. The photographic evidence was mounting, and the collective internet had become forensic photographic analysts. TikTokers, YouTubers, and Redditors alike left little wiggle room with superimposed photos like this one. This was either George or his identical twin, which is the lie we would have recommended to go with. But then came the video evidence.
Get your hands up high.
A Brazilian journalist covering the first annual Gay Pride Parade in 2005 claimed he interviewed George in this clip. At first, we weren't sure, but then we found this picture purported to be Santos, and the dress and facial garb appear to match. Take a look and listen, and let us know what you think in the comments.
O evento está bem organizado, gostei muito. Desci do trio porque o trio é muito pequenininho, não deu pra ficar ali em cima. Aí a gente vem pro som e fica com a galera. Mas aqui tá maior.
It's difficult to tell on that one, considering the darkness, the shades, and all the Portuguese. Whether that's him or not, the audiovisual feast that emerged from the digital realm left no doubts in the mind of the public. Instead of coming clean about one of his more innocuous inaccuracies, he chose to deny everything. Yes, the path from drag queen to Capitol Hill is an unusual one. Instead of embracing his past and perhaps turning it into an inspiring story, he did what would become part of his pattern, lying when the truth would do just as well, or perhaps better. The overwhelming amount of proof finally convinced the Congressman to fess up. Kind of. Stick around, because that's coming up later. At around the time Kitara sashayed down Copacabana Beach, George was accused of a crime in the city of Niterói. He would later admit to stealing a man's checkbook that was in his mother's possession. Whether that's stepdad or someone else is unknown. But according to a statement Santos made to local law enforcement, he used the hot blank checks to make purchases at a local shop. Employees there said that on June 17, 2008, George rolled in with more than the stolen checks. At checkout, he presented an ID card with the checkbook owner's name. Right beside that name was pasted George's smiling face. Bringing him in for questioning, cops made him cop to taking the checks from his mom's purse and using them to purchase clothing and shoes amounting to over $1,300 US. He acknowledged forging the man's signature and said he dumped the remaining documents in a manhole. Some other interesting tidbits in the statement are that he identified as white, was an American with dual citizenship, and listed professor as his profession. Let us know in the comments what classes you think a young Professor de Volder would have taught. The clerk said the fraudulent amounts were deducted from his pay, although his employer later reduced the debt. That drove the clerk to track George down on social media, and Santos allegedly said he'd pay it back, but ghosted him soon after. The local authorities had suspended their investigation into the theft because they reportedly couldn't find George for 10 years. All they had to do was wait, because Santos is the kind of guy that will eventually pop up somewhere. And sure enough, up the politician popped, although the incident appeared to go unnoticed by Democrats' opposition research. It didn't evade the radar of Brazilian badges. According to CNN, law enforcement officials in Brazil are planning to reinstate fraud charges against Mr. Santos. How could he think, in this era of instant information, this would never be found out? The Bananas Ballad of George Santos took an ominous turn in 2016. He claimed to run an animal charity and raised money for a homeless veteran's dog on GoFundMe. And this is where he done messed up. As divided as our country is now or ever will be, most of us can agree it's good to help dogs and homeless veterans. Americans almost expect to be lied to by their elected officials. Their lies don't usually blow anybody's hair back, but Georgie Boy is a very special case. There's no proof that he lies more than the average politician, but we do know that he's extremely bad at it. Our country can, under the right circumstances, be a forgiving bunch, and we love a good comeback story. Again, lying when the truth would do better. An inspiring anecdote of the son of a housekeeper in Brazil, overcoming poverty and moving to the land of opportunity, riding the GOP elephant to success in the House of Representatives. Instead, he managed to offend close to 100% of his constituents when he dissed a dog and a veteran, a sick dog in need of surgery at that, and a veteran down on his luck and living in his vehicle. This is Rich Ostoff, and he couldn't come up with the $3,000 needed to save his dog's life. This is Sapphire, and she had a tumor growing inside of her. Anthony DeVolder from Pets United to the rescue. A mutual friend brought the man of many names into Ostrov's life. DeVolder promised he could raise the necessary funds on the crowdfunding website, and he legitimately delivered. Except, when it was time to collect, the U.S. Navy veteran said he had trouble contacting his benefactor. According to Ostov, Santos was completely uncooperative after the fundraiser was complete. These didn't appear to be unfounded claims. Rich came complete with all the receipts. Here are excerpts from a text conversation Ostov had with Santos in 2016. Rich: Hey Anthony, Rich here. I was hoping to hear from you, just checking whether you made contact with the vet. George: The veterinarian already ruled out the surgery. He thinks it's very invasive. Rich: I'm starting to feel like I was mined for my family and friends' donations. George: The funds are moved to the next animal in need, and we will make sure we use our resources to keep her comfortable. Not surprisingly, this was little comfort to the veteran sailor. Sapphire, he says, was part of him and kept him from ending it more than once. Rich and Sapphire needed each other. Rich: I'm sick of being jerked around. Rich Ostov said that George then blew up and flat out refused to give him the money. Santos then ghosted Rich, and sadly, Sapphire had to be euthanized not long after. Ostov somehow persevered and was quite surprised when Anthony popped up again. He was shocked when in December of 2022 we started seeing him on TV. The name was now different, but the face was unmistakable. When confronted with these inhuman allegations, George did what George does and threw a Navy vet under the bus. His statement to CNN read, "I have no clue what he's talking about. I'd go to hell and back for a dog, and especially a veteran." GoFundMe said it removed the fundraiser when George would not provide proof of the delivery of funds to Ostov. The money was already gone, however, and Rich and Sapphire received zero. The FBI are now reportedly investigating this incident, and Santos has denied all wrongdoing categorically. Just when you think you've heard it all, and the story can't possibly turn any weirder, George outdoes himself once again. He makes wild and outlandish claims about his heritage, likes to play the victim, and uses some of the biggest tragic events in history to his political advantage. This is the bizarre world, according to George Anthony DeVolder Santos.
9/11 claimed my mother's life, tweeted congressional candidate George Santos in July of 21.
He claimed to have lost 4 employees in the Pulse massacre.
I happened to, at the time, have people that worked for me in the club. My company at the time, we lost 4 employees.
You said there in that letter that you are, quote, a proud American Jew. How do you explain that?
My heritage is Jewish. I've always identified as Jewish. I was raised a practicing Catholic. I think I've gone through this. Even I've not being raised a practicing Jew, I've always joked with friends and circles, even in the campaign, I'd say, guys, I'm Jewish.
The attacks on the World Trade Center of September 11, 2001 shocked and unified a nation. Ground Zero is considered sacred to many, especially for those that escaped before the towers collapsed. First-hand accounts from people who lived the experience get a lot of attention, and George Santos saw this as an opportunity. Back in the real world, his mother Fatima DeVolder was over 3,700 miles away in Brazil when the towers fell. This information is based on a green card application she filed in 2003, on which she stated she hadn't been in the United States since 1999. George's way of refuting this was to imply that his dead mother had lied on her paperwork. As you'll see later in the show, he told Piers Morgan that the subject is now conveniently off limits. But wait, September 11th isn't the only American tragedy into which George Santos has thrust himself. Lying about terrorist attacks seems to just be his thing. The Pulse Nightclub shooting in Orlando, Florida on June 12, 2016 killed 49 clubgoers and injured 53. At around the time of last call, about 320 people were inside the club when a radicalized Omar Mateen burst through the doors and channeled his evil ideals through his semi-automatic. These claims were never verified, and they're mathematically impossible. Orlando officials have confirmed that no more than 2 victims that night worked for the same employer, much less for George Santos. George's apparent affinity for playing the victim doesn't end there. As you'll see in the following interview, Santos claims that his family made a triumphant recovery after one of the largest atrocities in the world history.
I'm very proud of my Jewish heritage. I'm very proud of my grandparents' story. My grandfather fleeing Ukraine, fleeing Stalin's persecution, going to Belgium, finding refuge there, marrying my grandmother, then fleeing Hitler, going to Brazil.
That's right. They escaped not 1, but 2 murderous dictators in a fantastically inspiring rise from the ashes story, if true. There are certainly other amazing counts of heroism and survival during the Holocaust. However, according to genealogists, researchers, and news organizations, there's not even a whiff of validity to any of his claims. They smell of something else entirely. It appears George is sticking with this one as well.
I grew up with the story was my grandfather was born in Ukraine when it was part of the Soviet Union, migrated to Belgium, met my grandmother in 1940 or 1941. They fled to Brazil where they falsified a lot of their documents.
As with most of his lies, there may be a kernel of truth deep down inside, but at best, they're true-ish. Before we get to his most recent fantastic fallacies, it's time for a lightning round of lies. These are the top 11 whoppers we haven't yet covered, our dishonorable mentions, if you will. Let us know in the comments if we missed any or whether more have emerged since this writing. Okay, here we go. Number 11. George has claimed to be part black. Yes. In a July 2020 tweet, which surprisingly hasn't been deleted, Santos responded to someone skeptical of his claim that he's biracial. When pressed for an answer to which two, he responded, Caucasian and black. We wonder what Rachel Dolezal thinks of him stealing her act.
I was wondering if your dad really is an African-American man.
That's a very... I mean, I don't know what you're implying.
Are you African-American?
I don't understand the question.
Number 10, in a television interview with Newsmax, he said that independent Senator Kyrsten Sinema approached him before the State of the Union address and offered him words of encouragement.
She was very polite, very kind-hearted, as I've learned to see her. She's a good person, unlike Mr. Romney.
In his active imagination, she came up to him and said, "Hang in there, buddy." The senator's spokespeople have denied this. This was the same evening Santos boiled the blood of fellow GOP member Mitt Romney. George said Mitt uttered some words that were not very Mormon of him. Romney appeared to say, "You don't belong here, and you should be embarrassed." He would later dub Santos a sick puppy. Finally, something both sides agree on. George Santos, the great uniter. Number 9. During his most recent campaign, George allegedly told prospective donors he was a producer on the Broadway musical Spider-Man: Turn Off the Dark. This was confirmed to be false by Friendly Neighborhood lead producer Michael Cole. Whether or not George knew that the production was a notorious shit show is unclear. The technically complex project was fraught with delays, budget overruns, rewrites, actor replacements, and broken bones. It would seem a strange thing to add to one's resume when it makes sense for some of those actually involved to just go ahead and leave it off. Nothing to see here. Number 8. According to an ex-roommate called Yasser Rebello, Santos told him in 2013 that he would soon appear in Vogue. George said he was a model and worked at New York Fashion Week. According to New York Magazine, Santos never graced the runways. There's no evidence he was ever a model. But hey, at 34 years old, it's still possible. He'll need another job anyway at the end of his term, or possibly sooner. Number 7. Here's George in an interview with a Brazilian podcast, and it's the source of our next 2 Santos fantasies. The first is an alleged mugging on Fifth Avenue in New York City. George tells the hosts that just after leaving his office for the day, the mugger yoinked his watch and briefcase and stole the shoes right off his feet in broad daylight. When asked why the NYPD had no record of this calamity, Santos had no answer, but would later claim that because he was embarrassed about being assaulted, he just sucked it up and moved on. That's perhaps understandable for a real crime victim, but given George's history, it seems highly unlikely. Number 6. Speaking of highly unlikely, later in the podcast, George Santos claimed to be the victim of an assassination attempt. He said, "We have already suffered an attempt on my life, an assassination attempt," and purported that he needed a police escort standing in front of his house. There's as much evidence for that as there is for most of his other assertions. George somehow soldiers on, dodging bullets and deflecting arrows, all in humble service to the American people. Number 5. When George's fundraising committees reported to the FEC in January, they listed a man named Thomas Datweiler as his new treasurer. This was apparently news to Thomas Datweiler. His attorney was interviewed by several news outlets and contends his client never authorized his name to be on the paperwork. According to ABC News, Datweiler and his lawyers are awaiting word from the FEC on how to move forward with legal proceedings. That doesn't sound like anything positive for the embattled politician and may hang over his head in the foreseeable future. One of the many reasons we're so glad we're not George. Number 4. When Santos wasn't ripping up the runways or making bank on Wall Street, he was selling multi-million-dollar yachts. While attempting to explain his wealth in an interview with news website Semaphore, he plopped out this implausibility saying, "My referral fee can be anywhere between $200,000 and $400,000. A reporter for Semaphore said they sent follow-up questions, asking him to share contracts from his yacht sales or provide the names of his previous clients. Unsurprisingly, they have yet to receive a response from the Congressman. Number 3. Did you know about George's real estate empire? In financial disclosure forms, Santos claimed he was the owner of a $1 million apartment in Brazil, and that his family owned a total of 13 properties. He would later tell the New York Post that he owns nothing in the real estate market and lived with his sister in Queens. Allegedly, his sister has over $40,000 in unpaid rent in that apartment and faces eviction. The emperor running George's empire has no clothes, and the naked truth betrayed Santos once again. Number 2. When the pandemic reached the United States and people began to get sick in early 2020, the reporting of new cases in the country were sparse but newsworthy. In a March 2020 interview, he of course claimed to be one of the first to be infected in New York. We're just surprised he didn't really go big and claim to be patient zero. George is a walking statistical anomaly, an outlier of society, and selflessly bearing a heavy burden for the American people. He's the unluckiest man on the face of our planet, but somehow he overcame the odds and found a job just perfect for a compulsive liar. Number 1. Later in that same interview, George casually drops into conversation that, oh, by the way, he's a brain tumor survivor too.
I got the results of the test back. I definitely have breast cancer.
Take a listen as George describes it in his own words.
Well, look, I have an immunodeficiency and I also have acute chronic bronchitis. I also battled a brain tumor a couple of years ago and I had radiation done.
While most of George's lies are not illegal, some of his fibs and flubs may land him in trouble with the law. According to political news website Politico, the mystery of George's finances deepens. When he ran for Congress in 2019, his campaign made a series of donations to President Trump's re-election committee. The funny thing is, there's allegedly no record of the money being received. Did the money evaporate into the ether, as in the life-saving money for the veteran's dog? Time will tell, and investigators will undoubtedly probe his every utterance for evidence of a crime. And that's exactly what's happening. According to political news website The Hill, Rich Osthoff is one step closer to justice for his beloved dog, Sapphire. The U.S. Attorney's Office in the Eastern District of New York is reportedly looking into Santos's finances. The House Ethics Committee is expected to launch an investigation into 2 complaints about George. The first one contends that he made false claims about his income. Santos claimed to have earned over $1 million per year in Devolder organization dividends. But according to financial data company Dun & Bradstreet, the company revenue totaled $43,688 as of mid-2022. The other complaint potentially being investigated by the committee involves a different kind of ethics. It was filed by a former aide named Derek Myers, who alleged that on January 25th, George touched his groin and then invited Derek to his home one night. Santos allegedly said his husband was out of town. Derek denied George's advances and hastily departed the office. Just 5 days later, on January 30th, the unpaid intern walked into George's office for a talk. Derek had reportedly been promised a job by the congressman, and he wanted to know if he was hired. He's also secretly recording the conversation. It gets uncomfortable. Have you ever had the pleasure of getting called into your boss's office at 5 p.m. on Friday? The kind of meeting where you hear the 5 words that strike fear into cubicle colonists far and wide. Shut the door behind you. And it's palpable in the audio recording. George has arranged this sit-down with Myers. Also present that day was Santos's chief of staff, Charlie. The issue at hand was his employment, and the wrinkle was in the concern about Derek's past. He's the editor-in-chief for a small newspaper who was arrested for publishing an audio recording of court proceedings given to him by a source. Recording in the courtroom in that case had been forbidden by a court order. Charges were ultimately dropped, and he decided to seek a different career path in politics. In a deliciously ironic twist, George is concerned about how Derek's baggage will affect his own public image. The awkward conversation kicked off with a little small talk.
Sit. Where are you sitting? I like the timer.
Probably a thrift store. That's where I get all my ties.
Seriously?
I buy them all at thrift stores. They're like $2, $2 to $5, depending on what thrift store you go to.
The brief banter becomes too much for Derek very quickly. All that was likely on his mind was his employment future. And who knows? A young reporter entrenched with a congressman everyone loves to hate sounds like a fine recipe for a fat book deal. We don't know, of course, but we can't think of any other great motive to come knocking on George's door. For his part, Derek has been quoted by CBS News as saying about his reasons, the people of the district still deserve quality representation, and the staff is the one who does all the work. Less than a minute into the conversation, Derek got straight to the point, and he wanted to know whether or not the job offer he'd formerly received was still valid.
Are you guys firing me?
I'm sorry?
Are you firing me?
You're not hired.
I know. Are you letting me go before you fire me?
Can you breathe?
No, because Charlie said we needed to meet.
Then Charlie came into the room and joined George in the reporter's roast.
Anyway, so, first of all, thank you for coming in. Oh, by the way, his ties are from thrift stores. He says he's paid about $2. See, that's the way to do it.
Santos then shoved some chocolate in his face before continuing, seemingly concerned with anything except the matter at hand.
So I was down by the White House because I walked to the White House. Long walk. Well, I just was on the phone with people, and then I just started walking. And then there was this Macy's. I went there, and they had like this section where like, everything was 75% off. 95% of the stuff that was in there was absolutely unwearable.
As the chatter continued, one topic that came up was weight loss, as Derek Myers had previously lost a large amount of weight. Oh yeah? Well, George can top that story.
So I was 330 pounds January last year.
So I remember you saying that, and then I saw some photos.
Oh, 330 pounds in January. I weighed this morning, I'm 251.
Look at you go.
Following some attaboys from Derek, it was time for Santos to go in for the kill.
Anyway, let's cut to the chase. We do this with everybody, you know, before we onboard you. We like to get to know you a little bit. Okay. Right?
As the condescension condensed from the air in the room, the newsman began to explain himself.
A reporter couldn't be there that day, but somebody else was in the room, and they recorded the testimony on their cell phone, and then they gave it to our newsroom. And our newsroom, which I was leading at the time, took that audio and published it. The reason why that was so important was because the guy who was testifying at the time did what they called opt-out, which means he doesn't want to be on TV.
The Supreme Court has ruled journalists are not liable for unlawful recordings received by sources. In the court of King George, however, this is an unforgivable sin.
So, no offense to you, please don't take any offense. You have no right to violate something that the court already has granted. So I'm just hearing you explain, and I'm just sharing to you where it becomes problematic there, why they're calling it wiretap. Right?
Yeah.
I know you didn't physically wiretap.
Yeah, I don't know how to do any of that. But I can see that it's like concerning for you guys, because you're like, oh, now can we trust this guy? Is he secretly recording this conversation right now? You know, things like that.
Yeah, things like that. Who would do a thing like that? Judge George Santos went on to make a thinly veiled attempt at intimidation.
Look, from my understanding, recording in this building is a federal crime and you get 7 years.
I would never record with
Have fun at your peril. I won't do it.
So
after George cackles like a comic book villain, Derek wraps up his argument quite neatly. He even butters up the embattled elected official, as he might know he needs a miracle at this point.
And the truth is, we're all you. I mean, I wouldn't be in this office. I wouldn't be with my publication if I didn't do things to get there. You know, it's just the truth. And that's what I told Bish when we met a couple of weeks ago. I said, we're all George. This is how we get here. We're just masters of the game. It's just the truth. Like, I want to come out. And that's why I'm here.
Oh, good Lord, that's terrifying. Everyone in the competitive political sphere is George, discarding the truth just to advance their careers. We realize why Derek may be slathering George with compliments, but it makes us wonder, how many Georges are out there who are just better at lying? We only hear of the ones who are bad at it. Derek Myers makes his closing arguments, his employment hanging in the balance. You'll see that George Santos felt he had more important things to deal with than Derek.
I spent like a day and a half here last week, and I had so much fun.
Don Lemon just texted me. I'm sorry. I got it. I'm listening to you.
Whatever the answer is.
Don Lemon just texted me.
George sounded starstruck, drinking in the attention from major figures in the media. Santos later spends 1 full minute reading his device, laughing at jokes, and sharing the fun with his buddy Charlie.
Look, all I can say to you is the following. I'm not judging you, okay? But something like this does obviously concern me, right? It's a judgment call, quite frankly. That's all it is. And I've made bad judgment calls, and I'm reaping the consequences of those bad judgment calls, right?
Brutal. After he was finished pecking at his prey, George went to find Charlie, Derek went home, and the next day he was informed that an offer would not be extended. This case is ongoing, and George Santos denies any misdeeds. Scandals involving the love lives of politicians are nothing new, but George is a little more complicated and murkier than most. He married a Brazilian woman in December of 2012. 2 years later, he announced an engagement party with a man, and his current husband, if they are indeed married, hasn't been seen since the scandal. Here's what he had to say about the subject during his recent interview.
You're married.
Yes.
Although there's no record of that marriage having happened.
I'll actually show you the wedding certificate once we're done rolling.
So where were you married?
I was married on November 30th, 2021.
Where?
In Nassau County.
So it's all registered there?
Yeah.
Because no one's found any record?
Yeah, it's there. It's there.
Okay.
Well, that settles it, folks. It's there. As for his first marriage, Well, it's personal. As promised, here are his explanations for some lives we've covered so far. Did Santos really attend the exclusive Horace Mann School? Try to decide whether or not his answer is satisfactory.
The spokesman for the school told CNN there's no record of you ever attending. Why would that be?
I challenge to see what name they're looking under. If you look at my entire history of education, it was not under the name George Santos. So I just,
what name did you attend that school?
A variation. It was either George DeVolder or Anthony DeVolder. I wouldn't know. I was a minor. I don't know which way.
CNN, I believe, checked all the variants of the names that you've used, and there was no record the school could find of you ever attending.
I was there for 6 months of 9th grade.
That might not be very convincing for you, but George is making progress. He's gone from leaving Horace Mann 4 years before graduation to being there 6 months of 9th grade. If we did the math correctly, that's about an 82% reduction in falsehood. Moving on to his concocted college career, George had this to say about his time at Baruch. You know, where he was a volleyball star.
The second claim was that on the campaign website that you graduated with a degree in economics and finance from Baruch College in 2000.
I'll save you I did not attain a college education. That regrettably so is one of my biggest regrets in life.
So that was a lie.
Absolutely.
That's right. It was regrettably one of his biggest regrets when he regretted inventing intricate details about an education and graduation that never happened. What does a pretend person do after graduating college in his mind? There's actually a precedent for this. Just like Chandler Halderson, you conjure up a fancy new occupation with prestigious companies. As you can hear in episode 7 of Absolutely Criminal, Chandler's grand plan involved launching rockets with Elon Musk down at SpaceX in Florida. George's first out of school was more terrestrial, but no less impressive. Citigroup, which provides a large global network of financial services. The faux financier cut his teeth in the world of asset management and business development. He would later join Goldman Sachs, where the weasel of Wall Street would make his 6-figure profits for his new company, all at the tender age of 28.
I can argue I've done very well in Wall Street.
But not for Goldman's or Citigroup.
Not directly for them.
I mean, neither of them told the New York Times that neither of them had any record of you ever being employed.
I've never worked directly for them. I was never on their books, but I've done work for them through other companies that I work for. Yes, sir.
But why make up a boring business job when you can be powerful and famous? So George was off to the world of politics. He increased his presence within the party, and after a failed run in 2020, just 2 years later, the American dream appeared to come true for this openly gay, formerly straight, white, black, Jewish, Brazilian American conservative, definitely not drag queen. So why would he think he would get away with lies as big as the next one we're about to discuss?
I'll humor you this. I ran in 2020 for the same exact seat for Congress, and I got away with it then, and I guess...
Right. Well, that's honest.
Stupid.
With that logic in mind, here's how he explained one of his most brazen claims about his amazing ancestors. First, he said his grandparents of Ukrainian descent survived the Holocaust. When confronted with the news that records show them born in Brazil and were never under the dictator's thumb, George had this to say.
This is the one that I'll battle to my grave, to the point that I've already ordered those DNA test kits, and I've done 4 of them so far, and I'm just waiting for their returns.
Why has he done 4 of them? It's not like the lottery where the more times you enter, the better odds are to win. With one of his family generations surviving a man-made disaster, the next one survived another. Did his mother escape the South Tower on that terrible Manhattan day, only to perish years later from dust-related cancer?
Now, there is no record of your mother, Fatima DeVolder, ever having worked in the Twin Towers. So was that true?
That's true.
Why is there no record of her working there?
I don't know where people are looking or what they're looking for.
Well, with that cleared up, what about the 4 employees he said he lost in Pulse Nightclub? Why don't there seem to be any records that support this?
So where is the evidence for that?
I would venture calling the company and asking them on the record.
The media have done that.
No, they haven't. They haven't been able to attain any contact with the company.
There you have it. Call the company, guys. Must he do everything for you? And as for the dress he was wearing in Rio, That was so long ago, and it was like one night.
So if I was a drag queen, it was the poorest drag queen in the world because I had one outfit in one day.
I'm not saying you
were the shortest lived career.
I'm not saying you were a good drag queen. I'm just saying you clearly dressed up in drag.
Once.
He would later claim that when he talked about his assassination attempt, he meant death threats. It was just lost in the Portuguese translation, he said. And as we noted earlier, his mugging went unreported because he was embarrassed. But what about the lie that's arguably George's worst? The homeless veteran's dying dog, doomed without the fundraiser money Santos allegedly ran off with. It's hard to believe, but George's explanation is as sickening as the story itself.
Never met this man. A lot, like I've been abundantly clear. I feel for him. I feel for his story. I am as compassionate and as passionate about helping veterans and animals as the next guy. When I read this, it hit me like a bag of bricks because I don't know him. And most people who know me, who truly know me, Pierce, knows that if he had met me, his dog would have received the surgery. He wouldn't be homeless.
To recap, George said that not only is the veteran a liar, but he would have been rescued from homelessness if only he had been blessed enough to touch the hem of George's garment. Finally, Santos was asked about his exchange with Senator Romney and used it as one last time to play the victim.
Mitt Romney, one of the senior Republican senators, came up to you at the State of the Union and said you shouldn't be glad-handing people down the front. You should be out the back, hiding in shame. And he also said that you should stand down.
Wouldn't be the first time somebody told me to shut up and go to the back of the room, Pierce.
George's most recent allegations involve a credit card fraud scheme, a recent declaration from Gustavo Trella. A man who was convicted of credit card fraud and deported to Brazil accuses Representative George Santos of orchestrating a credit card skimming operation in Seattle back in 2017. According to Trella's sworn declaration, which he sent to multiple agencies, the person in charge of the credit card fraud when I was arrested was George Santos / Anthony DeVolder. Trella's declaration indicates that Santos taught him how to skim card information and clone cards. Trella claims that Santos gave him all the materials he needed and taught him how to put skimming devices and cameras on ATM machines. Trella and Santos reportedly met in the fall of 2016 on a Facebook group for Brazilians living in Orlando, Florida. By November, Trella had rented a room in Santos' Winter Park, Florida apartment. Santos kept a warehouse on Kirkman Road in Orlando to store the skimming equipment, according to Trella's declaration. Trella then flew out to Seattle, where he was caught on a security camera removing a skimming device from a Chase ATM on Pike Street. He was arrested on April 27, 2017, and at the time of his arrest, he had a fake Brazilian ID card and 10 suspected fraudulent cards in his hotel room. An empty FedEx package police found in his rental car was sent from the Winter Park unit he shared with Santos. Trella told federal authorities in his declaration that his deal with Santos was 50% for him and 50% for me. Despite Santos' alleged involvement in the Seattle scheme, Trella agreed to say he was working for someone in Brazil and not with Santos because he was worried that Santos would have his friends in Orlando deported. Trella recalled Santos warning him that he could make things worse for him since he was already in jail and Santos was a U.S. citizen. Election night was one of sheer exuberance for George Santos. Shortly after the celebration, however, the incessant hangover began. Suddenly, he was all over the news. All the major outlets wanted to interview him, and most of the voters in his district wanted their votes back. The spark of interest would expand exponentially in a short period of time, as the smolder of a new uncovered lie sustained itself day and night for weeks on end. If the past few years have taught us anything, it's unlikely those embers will die out anytime soon. Until next time, don't buy any yachts or real estate from this guy, and let the darkness come alive. If you enjoyed this video, please tell your friends about Absolutely Criminal, and if you'd like to further support the show, get caught red-handed in AC apparel at absolutelycriminal.com. The link is on the screen, or you can support us by watching one of these two videos we think you'll also enjoy. Bye for now.